Okay, I got here some lessons learned, at least for me, from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which we are almost at the 1 year mark. We're about 1 month short. Now, first off, I'm going to cover a few of some of the wrong lessons I think people are getting from this war. Before I go into the what we should be taking from the war so far, or at least what I have. First off, there's this belief that any war that happens like this is going to receive massive outside support and it's going to be unlimited. So I literally see this on a daily basis. People in the Patriot movement and in the militia talking about who's going to support us in the United States when a similar type of conflict happens here between the American people and the deep state or the globalists. That's a wrong lesson. The reason Ukraine is getting so much support is, remember the whole 10% for the big guy? And I mentioned it how many times during the SITREP reports about the economic system of Ukraine is capitalism. That's why so much support goes to Ukraine. And as we found out, I think it was from CBS News, about 2/3 of the support that goes to Ukraine disappears. And that's food, that's money, that's equipment, ammunition, all of it. A lot of stuff ends up on the international black market, and the money from the sales from that ends up in people's pockets. Another wrong lesson I think people get from the war in Ukraine is drones. There's the belief that drones is the way of the future, even for the resistance soldier. So here in the United States, every Patriot group, militia group needs to get drones immediately. There's a huge problem with that. The vast majority of the drones that you can get a hold of, you have to run them with your cell phone. Now, if you have the high-tech people that can do it, if you can get drones, link it through to some type of laptop computer with its own built-in Wi-Fi, that it can control the drone without someone else tracking you, hey, go ahead. But having cell phones in the field, not a good idea. And I'll get to that a bit later. Another misconception people have is guerrilla warfare nowadays means everybody can use their personally owned vehicle. Everyone's going to have a Jeep. Everyone can use an ATV, a snowmobile. You're going to be driving away in enemy tanks that are left behind. No. I think we still have the lesson from history here. The vast majority of militia, of resistance operations, is going to be light infantry. It's going to be dismounted. Remember, I've mentioned this before, vehicles require not just fuel and oil, they require spare parts. They require regular maintenance. And if you're keeping them out in the field, or you're driving off with them to a mission, you got huge problems there. You're using them in the field, storing them in the field, your maintenance is going to go up on them. If you're using a personally owned vehicle to go from your house, your farm, out to do a mission and then return home, well, guess what? There's a little thing called security cameras. Sooner or later, you're going to get tagged. They're going to figure out what vehicle it is. Even if they go through and just narrow it down to the make, model, and color for that entire county or parish or wherever you're at, they're going to find you sooner or later. Another misconception is militia is going to have tons of on-call, indirect fire, and air support from loyalist forces that support you. I actually think this is going to be a rarity. Another thing that we have that is still being pushed out there is that you only need to have the best and latest equipment. You know, forget about that bolt action rifle, forget about that law rocket. People are going to be supplying us with javelins, with NLAWs, you know, with AT-13s, you know, all kinds of high-tech ordnance. History doesn't show that. History shows, even recently in places like Bosnia, in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, the resistance, the guerrilla fighter, is going to have probably as much homemade equipment as actual military equipment. And the chance of them getting that high-tech shit is going to be pretty small. Now, what are some lessons that we can take away from this conflict, or at least I have so far? First off, no cell phones! Wow, that echoed. How many times have we heard now stories of Ukrainian troops being tracked by their cell transmissions, confirmed by Russian intelligence, Russian surveillance teams, Russian surveillance flights or drones, that yes, there are Ukrainian troops there we didn't know about till somebody picked up their cell phone and called for pizza. And then what ended up happening? That unit got taken out. Guess what? We keep mentioning this over and over. Here in the West, every single damn cell phone that is out there, especially in the United States, is required to have tracking software on it. The only way you can disable that stuff is remove the battery from the phone to keep it from transmitting. Yes, even when your phone is turned off, someone can ping it and find out where you're at without you knowing about it. No cell phones, leave them behind. Next lesson, prepare your area of operations ahead of time. Recon it. Pick where you think you could put a hide location at. Get out some caches if you have the time. Maybe dig some spider holes that you can use to cover routes into those hide locations for if you do have to mobilize. Well, how did you get that idea from Ukraine? Simple. How long have they expected an invasion by the Russian military? How many years did they waste that they could have been preparing those hide locations in the woods, stocking them with shelf-stable foods, maybe getting some illegal weapons off the international market? I mean, it is Ukraine, let's be serious here. I'm sure they had a pretty big illegal arms market in Ukraine. They should have stocked up. They didn't. Think ahead. Get your logistics in as much as possible before a conflict begins, because after it starts, it's going to be really damn limited. Next lesson learned, which we're seeing from both sides: destroy equipment that you have to leave behind. Don't let your enemy get a hold of it. How many tanks, armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery pieces, mortars, heavy machine guns, rocket launchers, jeeps have we seen both sides capture from the other side, and then they just turn around, fix it up a little bit, slap some new markings on it, and incorporate it in their own military? Guess what? Even in a resistance movement, the equipment you leave behind, your enemy can use it against you. Potentially by equipping some of their troops with those uniforms, with that equipment. Slaughtering civilians. Making sure there's a few survivors who will then go around say that you did it. Anything that needs to be left behind must be destroyed. Burn it, blow it up, toss it into a deep pool in a river or in a lake, whatever. Next lesson, which we are seeing on both sides: secure your logistics. Disperse it, camouflage it. Don't have all your eggs in one basket. Spread your stuff out. Put it in manageable batches around your area that you can still keep control over depending on your manpower and your means to disperse the logistics. Don't have it all in one location, because if that one location gets hit, you've then lost everything, haven't you? If you have 6 locations of supplies spread out, each of them having generally the same types of supplies, one of those locations gets hit, you still got 5 others you can draw from. Camouflage and dispersal. Next lesson we've seen, and this is primarily on the Russians on this one. If you are using unsecured radios, radios that do not have free cop capability or encryption, you need to keep your transmissions as brief as possible. Brevity codes. Limit the power of those transmissions. If you're only trying to talk to someone who's a half mile away, you don't need to have the power jacked up that someone 20 miles away can pick you up easily. Most radios do have power settings on them. You can also control how far you transmit by the length and power of your antenna. Watch that stuff. As much as possible, use codes. Make them simple. You don't need the old matrix of like 5 numbers, as each individual letter is its own separate 5-number code or something like that. You don't need to go that in depth. Use code words. And like I said, brevity. If you're going from one location to another, you're doing a administrative move or whatever, instead of going out and saying, this is Alpha 2 calling Alpha 1, we are en route to position such and such. It could be Alpha 2 Bravo 1, dog patch, and then the code name for that location. Simple. Brevity. Another thing that I've picked up from the fighting in Ukraine, small unit tactics. Train on basic patrolling. Train on basic movement through enemy territory. That's the primarily one you need to concentrate on, because why? That security's higher then. Train on basic ambushes. Train on raids. Getting in there, hitting your enemy, accomplishing what you need to accomplish, steal what you need to steal, and then get the hell out of there as fast as possible. Train, 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 train. Basic, small unit, infantry, and engineer, sapper, tactics. Another thing that we've seen, especially in the beginning of the war, in the fighting north of Kiev, guerrilla warfare basics. How to do different types of ambushes based on the enemy you're trying to hit and the location. Ways to supply yourself, your logistics behind enemy lines. How to emplace the most common mines you can come across. Construction of IEDs using enemy ordnance. Or, your own country's ordnance, if you come across it. Basic sniping. And when you're sniping, who do you hit? Do you pick off that private in the trench? Or are you going to be smart, use that sniper to take out the VIPs, like high-ranking officers? And also, another guerrilla warfare basic over the last 20, 30 years, vehicle-borne IEDs, car bombs. Get an idea on some of the tactics on how the stuff was used. Don't construct them now. I'm not telling you that. But there's nothing wrong with you researching, so that if you're in that situation, you know how to do it. At least have a basic idea on a battle drill on how to employ it and what to employ it against. Another lesson that we are seeing with Ukraine on both sides, basic survival skills. Both of these are armies that are getting outside support, but you're still seeing the basic skills on surviving that need to be reinforced, need to be known by each individual troop. Things like food acquisition and how to prepare it. Things like how to build a shelter to stay alive in extreme elements, like the cold, like the snow, like rain, like mud. Another basic skill everyone should have: gathering water and purifying that water. Another one, proper clothing. Make sure you have the proper clothes for the environment. All this falls under your basic survival skills tasks that everyone should work on and know. Don't concentrate on just that one person knowing this stuff. Everyone should know this stuff, at least a basic understanding on it, so that they can stay alive if they are separated from everyone else. Or you're in a situation where you can't communicate or support each other back and forth because the enemy's fire is too bad, the situation is too fierce. You know, everyone should have a basic understanding on how to stay alive, regardless of the situation. Another lesson learned from the war in Ukraine, on both sides, thermal concealment. Both sides are using thermals heavily. Could we see that here in the United States or in Western Europe in any type of resistance situation? Yes. Thermals don't cost, a ton of cash. Are they pricey? Yes. But they're still relatively attainable even by the average person. So have an understanding on how to conceal your thermal signature. How to conceal it for a short period of time. That react to contact, the enemy's coming in, you hear a drone or see a drone coming in, you quickly throw that survival blanket over you with hopefully some camouflage material attached to it to conceal yourself until that drone leaves the area. And also how to conceal your thermal signature long time period so that you can lay down and get 8 hours of sleep maybe. So that you can be in a hide in the middle of an enemy area that they're occupying and them not knowing you're there. Another lesson that we're seeing on both sides, basic field fortifications, how to construct them, how to defend from them properly, and also how to attack them. How do you approach a bunker? How do you attack a trench line? How do you construct them? How do you construct them that they'll still keep you alive and you can fight from them even after a major artillery barrage pounds the hell out of the entire area? Another one that I've seen, and this is really bad for the Ukrainians, sanitation, trash, feces. Have one area designated as a latrine or a couple areas, and that, guess what? That's the only place you're going to drop your pants and pop a squat. Don't leave piles everywhere. Why? That brings insects. Insects bring disease. Trash, same thing. Have an area that the trash gets collected up at, and then it's disposed of properly, taken far away from the area, buried, burned, whatever way you have to dispose of it. Trash draws animals. Animals also can cause disease. They can attack your people as they're defending that trash. Basic field sanitation. Another lesson that we are seeing a hell of a lot with the Ukrainians now, camouflage and blending in. Just because you got a fancy multicam uniform doesn't mean you're always going to blend in. You got a vehicle, you got a mortar, a tank, camouflage the damn thing. Even if it means you just going out, cutting down some brush from the area, tossing it over the top of a tarp that you threw over it, or even some blankets to conceal what's there. Your enemy can be flying overhead, and that uncovered pane of glass on your vehicle, that windshield, even just a little sliver, can be just enough to give away a glint that you're down there. And then they will come back, instead of doing a cursory search, they're going to do a more detailed search. After that more detailed search, they're going to pound the hell out of you and wipe you out. Another thing that we are seeing, especially right now, rest time. Your people need to decompress. When the battle's done, pull them out, put them in a relatively quote-unquote safe area, let them get some rest. Let them get some sleep, play games, read books, do the 5-finger shuffle, to let off some steam, whatever needs to be done. You can't stay keyed up 24/7. If you do, you're just going to end up being a PTSD casualty, post-traumatic stress disorder casualty. You're going to break. You need to decompress once in a while. You need time for that. Another major lesson that we're seeing, especially with the militia in the Donbass, old weapons are still usable weapons. We're seeing a lot of Mosin Nagants, not as your frontline infantry rifle, but with the scope on it being used as a sniper rifle. Guess what? Still as effective today as it was back in World War II when the Russians were doing it against the Nazis. Another thing we're seeing, PPS-43s, Leningrads. Those little, knocked them out 1 million a minute submachine guns produced behind enemy lines in World War II in the Soviet Union. Guess what? They can still kill someone during a sweep of a trench today, or going building to building today, the same as they did back in the 1940s. And then we also have old tanks, ones that are considerably out of date, but guess what? Still being used on a battlefield, still effective. The Ukrainians are using T-64s. The militias in the Donbass, T-62s. And as you should have seen over the last couple months here, the Ukrainians are even getting old T-55s upgraded with new fire control systems. There's still a 70-year-old tank, but it still has its place on the battlefield. Maybe not in the very front lines, but you can still use them to counter an enemy penetration of the front lines. Another lesson, security. Make sure you deploy security patrols, even if it is just a fire team, to go around your area. See, is the enemy observing? Do you find tracks of the enemy approaching? Do you find booby traps that have been put out? Ambushes, snipers. Have your people out there checking the area. Another thing, LPOPs, listening posts, observation posts. So when the enemy is approaching along a likely avenue of advance, of approach to your position, you got someone posted up there who can send you that quick radio message, hey, Fritz is on his way. And the last thing I have on here, hot food. It's winter in Ukraine right now. Guess what? Hot food keeps you alive. And I'm not just talking your pre-packaged rations. I'm talking sitting down, pulling out that paper plate if you're in a Western military or a Western country, pulling out that mess kit, going up to a chow line, getting some stew, getting some rice and with whatever's mixed into it, getting you a little piece of venison, get you a couple pieces of homemade biscuits or homemade bread, and then sitting down with your buddies to that hot chow and decompress. Have some actual food, something other than prepackaged stuff. that you pop in a heater, heat it up, and then you eat it out of a pouch or out of the can. A rations, as they're called in U.S. military, are a huge morale builder, and we're seeing that in Ukraine also. If you're not up on the front lines, you're not in the trenches, not in a operation at that time, make sure your people get some actual food. It has huge psychological value for your people for improving their morale. Now, these are just the lessons I came up with over the last 12 months. Let's see in the comments here, what lessons have you gotten? You know, have you thought of something that I haven't from looking at the combat footage of what's going on there? What lessons have you taken away? Things that maybe someone else hasn't. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot Militia movements, always remember Hessians.